It's 4 o'clock on a Thursday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi's Quarantini Happy Hour. Hello, everybody. How are you guys? Today, we're going to talk about, is there real value for a composer in having their own personal website? And some other topics as well. But first, let's say hello to the folks in the chat room. Hello, everybody. We've got Riney Bear, Peter Rahill, Jesse J. Peck, Ewart Williams, Jan Wilage, Lamar Pecorino, Jesse, I think I already said hello to Jesse, Marianne Laird, Dan Weber, Andre Stepanian, Bob Gunnerfelt, Giovanni Lanza, Peter Rahill, Chris Anderson, link failure, that's not good. Hopefully you're seeing me. Let's see, Spiritual, Libby Harrison, Simon Burnham, Dean Turner, Lamar Pecorino. Okay, we're all good, right? You guys can see me and hear me? Everything we're on today, we're not having any technical problems like we did yesterday? Yay, all right. Yeah, we almost weren't on time today because the electrical outlet that I've got one of my studio lights and the Rodecaster plugged into, all of a sudden, just like 30 seconds before I was going to go live, it just shut down and I was missing a light and I didn't have the Taxi theme music. Woo! Like Michael's t-shirt. Yes, it's my Criteria Recording Studio shirt. Anyway, I was looking at the forum a little while ago, and I saw that one of the topics on the forum was, is there value in having a website for composers? And I believe that there is. There were mixed opinions on there. The reason that I think it's valuable for composers to have a website, and I realize there's some expense involved, not a lot if you use, some of the platforms are rather inexpensive, some are free. Obviously, I'm a fan of Bandzoogle just because I've known them for a long time, but many Taxi members use Bandzoogle and have had great success with it. Excuse me. I think that the number one reason I would say, as a guy who loves marketing, is that let's say your music is forwarded to a production music library or a publisher or a record label via a Taxi listing, or on your own you've gotten to any of those entities. Typically, the first thing they do is they want to know a little bit about you. If it's a record label, they want to see, do you have a fan base at all? Have you played any gigs? Obviously, 2020, not so much. They want to know more about you. They want to get a sense for how long you've been doing it, maybe, what kind of success that you've had in the context of production music libraries or music supervisor checking you out, which I think music supervisors are probably less likely to check you out just because they have to work so fast and they have so much to do. But when people check you out, they want to say or see that like, what are your latest placements? It's a good place to showcase your best music. I don't know that I would put up 100 tracks or 100 songs on there, but 5 or 10 or 15 of your very best. I would also double check if some of the material you're inclined to put up there has already been published. I would check with the publisher to make sure that it's okay if you use it personally on your website. But that's basically it. I think it lends credibility. On the flip side of that, what are the odds that you're going to get a lot of visitors? Probably not. But you know what? This isn't about getting a lot of visitors. Like, I would love it if millions of people visited the Taxi website all the time. But for you as a composer or an artist or a songwriter, it doesn't matter. You may only get 5 visitors, but they could be 5 visitors that are very important to you. They want to check you out. They want to look for credibility. So I think it's important. you can mess up a website pretty easily. As we talked about, I think we talked about this with Dave Cool from Bandzoogle on Monday's show, and that is that your website should have one purpose in mind. So let's say that you're an instrumental composer that does a lot of instrumental cues that would be mostly applicable to reality TV shows. So the most important function of your homepage of your website, which is by far the most important page, is to show credibility. So a short bio, a short description actually, not a full bio. You don't want a bio on the homepage that's 300 words long and talks about every little gig you've played at Rusty's Rib Ranch, or that you've been making music since you were 4 years old. That's not going to impress them. You can have that, a layer deeper on a second page or second layer page, but on the home page, you want something like, Michael Lasko has been composing instrumental cues since 2012 and currently has over 125 compositions, 78 placements on TV shows like blah, 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 and on networks like blah, 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 blah. Yeah, Rusty's Rib Ranch, my favorite reference. So, just a paragraph. Probably a photo of you wouldn't hurt, although obviously people in the business of film and TV music really don't care what you look like. But it builds a sense of familiarity. And I would just make sure that the homepage is clean. Whenever you're dealing with headlines, think of the New York Times. Maybe you don't like the content of the New York Times if you're on the conservative side of things. Maybe you love the New York Times if you're on the liberal side of things. Those things just don't matter. But what does matter is I've always used the size of their headlines as a guide for what the size of my headline should be relative to the body copy. And as we talked about on the show this past Monday, use easily readable fonts for body copy, for that description, or for song titles. Anything that's below the headline, go with something clean and modern, and I don't mean like ultra modern, I just mean contemporary looking, like Arial is a popular font. Helvetica is popular font. Those are sans serif fonts, meaning they don't have the little tails on the letters. I personally love to use Times and Times New Roman, just because there's a great book that I read years ago by an author named Colin Wheeldon, and he talks about, they have actually done studies, readability studies, and they found that for on the printed page, paper, remember paper? That a 12-point Times or Times New Roman font is the most easy to read. And on the internet, I've heard that sans serif fonts for body copy are typically more frequently used and maybe a little easier on the eyes. Readability is important. But headlines, you can go with a different font for the headline, but again, readability is the key. So I would say to use Times or Times New Roman. Or you could flip it and you could use Arial for your headline and Times New Roman for your body copy. Also important to tag your photographs. If you've got a photograph of yourself up there, tag the photograph. If you're Andrei Stepanian, let's say, tag the photograph. It says Andrei Stepanian. That's one more thing for Google's search engine to latch onto. That way, let's say a production music library heard one of your pieces through a taxi forward, and they're going to Google Andrei Stepanian. What are they going to find? Well, if your website, especially if your website is like andreistepanian.com, that's very likely to come up very high in the search results, which is what you want. There are statistics which I haven't memorized, but being on the first page of Google is critically important. Being in the top 3 things on a Google first page, even more important. And there are varying opinions about whether or not having what's called an exact match domain name is important to the Google search algorithm. Many marketers have made the claim that that has become less important over the years. About 2 years ago, I found an article written by somebody who remained anonymous because they work at Google and couldn't identify him or herself. But they said, don't be fooled, that is still an important part of the algorithm, that having an exact match search name. So if your name, is Bob Jones, that's a pretty generic name. You may not want to go with bobjones.com, even if it's available, just because there could be a million other Bob Joneses out there. But you could have your website URL be Bob Jones Music. That would separate you out very quickly from the other Bob Joneses, unless there were 100 of those that were also composers or songwriters or whatever. You could have bobjonessongwriter.com, bobjonescomposer.com, bobjonesmusic.com. I think you get the idea. And yes, Sam Coffey says .com is still the best I've heard. Yeah, I belong to several groups of domain name sellers and buyers and brokers and experts, and by far they all agree that .com is the gold standard. .net is kind of a distant second, and all the other dots like Bob Jones, .music, those other dots, I forget, there's a technical name for it which I can't remember, not very important at all. Hang on a second, I'm going to turn off the heater, it's getting a little warm. It's a very chilly, rainy, windy day here in what used to be sunny Southern California. Looking outside right now, I can tell you that we've got a very heavy mist, not quite a rain, but it's blowing sideways. It looks like a northeaster's coming, but I don't think we get those here in California. .biz, .tv, etc. Really, really, really not very strong. Peter Rahill has a trivia question for me on the Steely Dan Asia album. Have you got a favorite song? Yeah, the song Asia itself. As a matter of fact, this leads me to my next subject, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. No chocolate-covered coffee beans today because I ate them all. Yes. Okay, so my next topic that I want to talk about today is mixing on headphones. As virtually all of you know, hello, Krista Knight, good to see you here. I recently got Logic, and I've been playing with it a little bit more. Last Saturday was kind of my tour de force day for playing with it for hours. But here and there at night, I've been squeezing in a little bit of time on it. And I've been mixing. Oh, I took them upstairs. I've been just learning some routing stuff and just learning the topography of it all. Haven't done anything in record mode or anything in edit mode yet. So strictly just mixing, but more importantly, getting to know, trying out the plugins that came with it. I've purchased a few plugins, trying those, and got to say, pretty impressed with plugins on the whole. Logic was the drinking word today. Anyway, sometimes when I'm working out, my wife, I'm sitting 15 feet away from the family room. So at night, my wife might be over sitting on the couch looking at stuff on her phone or watching a decorating show on HGTV. So I'll put on my headphones, and I've been using my Bose noise canceling headphones, which are probably not the greatest headphones to mix on. There are, if you research it, there are several brands and models of headphones that are recommended for mixing. I think most real engineers would tell you that mixing on headphones is not great because of the proximity to your ears. And then there's the issue of open back headphones or closed back headphones. Personally, I prefer closed. But when I was researching it last night and then again a little bit this morning while I was having my coffee, I found out that Waves, which you guys, if you're on the Waves website or on their mailing list, you probably saw that they've just announced or just released a new product called the Waves NX Virtual Mix Room. They also, I'm getting a tickle in my throat. Might have to go grab a cough drop. Oh no, I've got the COVID. No, I don't. Anyway, they also have had for a while the Abbey Road NX Virtual Mix Room. So I read some early reviews, saw a video with the shootout of the Abbey Road versus the Waves Mix Room. I've got to say, I'm really impressed. I haven't tried either one of them yet, and I don't know that I should try them. I mean, it's a pretty cheap plugin. I think the new release is what studio is it in Nashville? I've actually been in that control room. Ocean Way, Nashville. It was originally a studio. It was a church that was converted to a studio. It's a gorgeous, drop dead gorgeous studio. Alan Sides, who is a legendary engineer and studio owner, bought it some years ago, and it became part of the Ocean Way family of studios. Anyway, the new version is the Ocean Way NX Virtual Mix Room. It's $35, so I'm thinking about getting it, but I think I should probably get some proper headphones. Martin Gravel says there are some latency issues for the moment in the Ocean Way version. Okay, I haven't seen that pop up yet, but I will definitely research that. Plugin Alliance monitor is way better with SonarWorks. Interesting. SonarWorks reference 4 works great. Good to know. I will check that out. Would I mention a few good open and close back headphones? Honestly, Libby, I'm not expert enough or well informed enough to give you any good advice on that. I remember, you guys are probably going to laugh at this, but we used some headphones at Criteria Studios in Miami back in the 70s. They were Beyerdynamics that were kind of, I don't even know. Here, let me pop open a browser and do a quick search. And of course, they don't have them. I can't find the ones I used to use back in the day. Anyway, Beyer has all kinds of headphones out there now, and I'm sure they've probably come up. These headphones were probably designed and released back in the early 70s, but I still see them being used at studios. They were actually pretty good sounding headphones. I couldn't tell you that they are like audiophile headphones. I think that they were pretty darn good and pretty realistic sounding headphones that were built very solidly, because anything that's used in the context of a recording studio has to stand up pretty well. And headphones are one of those things that get dropped all the time. People drop them and then step on them. Cables get pulled out of them. They get blown up. But those were closed back headphones. I really like those. And at some point in the later 70s, people started using a lot of the Yamaha open back headphones that were pretty small. They just barely they didn't even cover your ear, and they had kind of an open cell foam thing that went over them, and they sounded pretty good, although personally I would say I remember the bass being somewhat deficient in them. Some musicians really liked using them in the studio when they were working like with a relatively full group of musicians, like a rhythm section, for instance. They liked the open back aspect so that they could hear what was going on out in the room, and maybe they didn't have to rely so much. Remember, back in my day, we didn't have the cool little headphone mixers that they have now, where each person in the room could dial in their own mix of, bass, drums, guitars, whatever. Basically, it's whatever mix we fed people out in the studio from the control room. And yeah, we did have the ability to send out 2 or 3 different types of mixes. But those console sends, which are basically knobs that also did what faders did, those controlled the mix that you were sending out there. And usually we had 6 sends on a console. So if you wanted stereo, sends 1 and 2 would be a pair, 3 and 4 would be a pair, 5 and 6 would be a pair. So we had 3 sets of stereo sends. So if we were using all 3 of those, to, let's say, sends 1 and 2 were a stereo mix that we sent out to the drummer and the bass player. 3 and 4 might have been for the guitarist and keyboard player. 5 and 6 might have been what we used for the vocalist. So then we had no sends left to send to reverb or delays or whatever other outboard that we might have been sending out that way. So there you go. So back in those days, I could understand why open back headphones might have been more desirable. But for mixing, and I think a lot of people need to mix on headphones because they may be working out of it. I think a lot of people are working out of 10-foot by 12-foot bedrooms with squared corners, parallel walls, probably not a lot of bass trapping in the rooms. And although I'm not a believer that for most people, and I think of Matt Vanderbo, one of our more successful members, he's got a really stripped down studio. A lot of you guys have really stripped down studios. And you don't have walls built within walls. You don't have bass traps. You don't have diffusive surfaces on your walls. So your rooms could have like a mid-range honk to them. It could have a lot of bass buildup, which would make your mixes bass deficient. There are just so many things that can go wrong in a bedroom. However, a lot of people are pretty successful using very minimal stuff, like maybe a little bit of acoustic foam on walls, or maybe some of those diffusion devices that you can buy that come in like a 4-foot by 4-foot section, and you staple them up or glue them up on a wall. You can do things to make a bedroom sound relatively decent. Don't forget the ceiling. That's also an important reflective surface. So you can get away with near field monitors like NS10s, maybe even, what are the new versions of NS10s? I think NS8s or something like that. Any of the small, like KRK monitors are pretty popular and pretty good. If you're working near field and you follow the rules of good monitor placement, I mean, things matter. Like if you have, let's say my phone is a monitor, and let's say that's the tweeter and the woofer's down there. Well, if your monitors are placed high enough that they are a little higher than your head, then the tweeter's going to be blowing over your head. Tweeters are directional. Bass speakers are not so directional. So the right thing to do is to have the monitors placed at ear level. And I always preferred, do it this way, where the woofers were in the middle. It's so hard working backwards. I would have the woofers in the middle because that's where your bass and kick are coming from, and the tweeters on the outside, so that you got good side-to-side definition, and it just worked better for me. And I think I learned that from reading books about it back in the day. I love Pat Warris says the JBL LS, what are they? LSR 305s. I think I mentioned years ago I was at the JBL warehouse and showroom in Northridge, California. They invited me down to listen to some of their new monitors. I love JBL 4311s. Back when I first started working in the studio, they were a 12-inch three-way speaker, passive speaker, with a ducted port. And they were the industry standard before NS10s came along. The JBLs had a good solid bottom end. The mid-range was a little hyped. Frankly, they weren't amazing speakers, but they did work pretty well in the studio. Albums like One of These Nights by the Eagles, almost anything that Bill Simzik engineered. Hotel California was done on JBL 4311s. Eric Clapton's 461 Ocean Boulevard with I Shot the Sheriff was done on those. NS10s didn't exist at that point in time. So that's what people used. Then NS10s came out and a lot of people switched to NS10s that only had a tweeter and a woofer, didn't have mid-range, a mid-range driver in them, and they weren't so harsh in the mid-range. Whoops. Sorry, forgot to silence my phone. I love the way tannoys sound, but I wouldn't mix records on them. I've used tannoys. Back in the early to mid 80s, Tannoy kept sending me monitors to check out. I destroyed a pair of their big monitors, like their main control room monitors. They had double 15 woofers in them. I actually blew some up, and the whole front plate. I mean, these were big speakers that weighed probably a couple 100 pounds each, maybe more. And they sat up over the control room window. And one night I was playing something back really loud in the control room at the end of the night to send everybody home all pumped up, and heard this weird sound. And all of a sudden, the whole front piece of wood that had those monitors mounted in it just cracked out and fell out of the cabinet and hit the floor. Actually ripped through the double knit fabric that hid the speakers in the control room. Oh boy. But I did use as a third pair, I had NS10s in that room. Normally I had Uri 813s, which were fairly good, large monitors. Those are the ones with like the blue horn in them. They were kind of an industry standard, I would say, between maybe 1977 and 1988-ish. They were affordable and they sounded pretty good. I wouldn't mix records on big monitors. I think most pro engineers don't do that. Most pro engineers tend to use near-field monitors mounted up around the meter bridge area. But the little tannoys that were a little bit bigger than an NS10, and I can't even remember if it was an 8-inch or a 10-inch woofer in there. I can't remember if they even had a mid-range driver or not. They sounded really pretty. I mean, I used to say that those speakers sounded like a Neve console. They had just the right amount of harmonic distortion. I called them honey drippers because they just sounded so sweet. The problem was they sounded so sweet, so sexy, so good that if you mixed something on them and took it out of the room, it didn't sound good because the speakers just made everything sound better. Yep, volume at 11. I haven't played with tannoys in so many years, I can't even tell you what the models are. I just know that they're really well crafted and they sound great. So if I were setting up like nice speakers in the family room to go with my flat screen, I might use tannoys for that. If I were setting up a stereo, do they still call them stereos? If I were setting up a music playback system in my home, I might use tannoys. They just sounded so pretty, and they sounded pretty on a lot of stuff. Every now and then I would have the good fortune to do a jazz record, which is a total different engineering and mixing discipline than doing like a pop record or a rock record. The tannoys sounded really good on jazz. They sounded great when I would do string dates and listen back on the tannoys. I mean, it, like, send a chill up your spine. They sounded so good. But again, when I mix stuff, I remember I was working with a group called the Breakers in about 1984, 85, 86. I worked with them on and off over a period of 2 or 3 years. Kind of a pop group. And they had like Beach Boy background vocals. Their drummer was great. I got great drum sounds on him. And I remember mixing a song called Nola, about a girl named Nola, not like New Orleans. I just loved that mix. As a matter of fact, I left the studio at like 2 o'clock in the morning, so pumped about that mix. And I came back to work the next day and I called a bunch of my fellow engineers and co-workers from the staff in the control room, and I very proudly, turned up the SSL to about 8, and played Nola through the tannoys, and it sounded so good. And after everybody left the control room, one of the engineers who I had tremendous respect for, a guy named Roy Latham, who was a great audio post engineer and a great music engineer, said to me, take your mix out of here, the mix that I had done on Nola, on the tannoys. He said, take it out of here. You're going to be brokenhearted. And he was absolutely right. So there you go. I don't know what new tannoys sound like. I just know that if I were setting up a home stereo, I would use the tannoys. So there you go. So I'm curious. I'm going to go back and check the chat later and research this whole situation on room simulators for mixing on headphones, because I would love to be able to sit 20 feet away from my wife while she's watching TV at night or reading a book. And plus, I've got everything set up on a 6 foot by 6 foot square table between our kitchen and the family room. This is my office, has been now for 10 months or whatever. We've got a couple empty bedrooms upstairs, but I just don't want to take a bedroom and turn it into a studio right now. At some point, I may. Sorry, I got to blow my nose. Sounded honky, right? So that's that discussion. Anyway, if anybody has any great recommendations, feel free to email Liz at liz@taxi.com, and she can forward me that stuff. Otherwise, I'll go back and check the chat. I came up with something. I don't think, again, I only know like 10% of Logic at this point. I have much to learn. And I haven't officially started watching any tutorials that start like at square one and work your way through, but I do plan on doing that. I've been sporadically checking out different tutorials about different aspects of Logic as I've encountered them while I'm using it, but I really need to start at square one and go through the baby steps. Yeah, I need to do that. Anyway, but I came up with something that I don't believe exists in Logic. You guys can tell me if I just haven't found it yet. And that is a master bypass switch. I should say a master plug-in bypass switch. And I'm not talking about a bypass switch on just the master fader. I'm talking about, wouldn't it be cool that once you've got a mix to be able to click one switch and have all of your plugins disabled. I don't know that there's any real application for that to make your mixes better. This is just me talking as an engineer, that back in the day when I worked on SSLs, that I always wished that when I got a mix finished that I could just hit a button and have all of my reverb off, all of my EQ off, all of my compression off, and just see what it sounded like with the click of one thing, rather than having, I know Andre says, yes, you can in Logic. Please tell me how. I know that you can do it on a particular channel, but can you do it for the entire console at one time? That's what I want to do, because I would love to hear like a before and after, to make yourself feel better about how talented you are. Peter Rahill just took a sip. Mixing in mono, I'm kind of a fan. Wow. Thanks, Andre. I definitely want to know about that. Low volume mixing is good, yes. It's really hard. I personally always have had a problem mixing at low levels, and we all know you can really, truly cause harm to your ears. I've got tinnitus in both ears. But I do remember when it happened to me. It was like 20, 25 years ago, maybe even more. I had swollen glands and sore throat. It moved into my ears. And I remember calling my doctor and saying, I've got a double ear infection. It's really painful. And his scheduler said, her exact words were, honey, by the time we can get you in here, it'll be gone. And I didn't go thinking, I start gargling with salt water. I didn't take antibiotics. And back in those days, urgent cares weren't so readily available. You had to go to the ER, and I don't like going to the ER where you have to sit in a room with like 25 other sick people. So I didn't take care of it, and a couple days later, my ears were very plugged up. A couple days after that, I noticed some ringing in my ears, and as I'm sitting here talking to you now, I'm hearing somewhere around 8K in both of my ears, and it's been that way for a long, long time. It's fairly loud. Funny enough, I haven't found it to be that much of a detriment while I've been working in Logic lately, but and I've had my ears tested, and basically what I found out is I've got normal hearing for somebody of my age. So yeah, some top end is missing. My wife claims that I need hearing aids. Nobody else does. Just kidding, honey, if you're watching the show. Anyway, a lot of my friends, when I was at the Criteria reunion in November of 2019, I bumped into some of my friends that are legendary engineers that are now wearing hearing aids because they damaged their ears from too many years of listening at loud levels, which we all did back then. I mean, there's nothing better than getting to the end of a day. Your ears are pretty crispy at the end of the day anyway. You've worn them out. And so pretty typical that at the end of the day, you call everybody in the control room and you listen back one more time before you all go home. You want to send everybody home with a smile on their face, and you listen loudly. Well, during the course of mixing, I constantly had to keep, bringing it up louder and louder, because as your ears, I don't even know what they call it, but your ears like get immune to certain frequencies. There's a thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve, which is things sound better louder. Things become, different parts of the oral spectrum or audio spectrum become more pronounced the louder you get. So it's easier, to pick out details and adjust things at louder levels. Well, unfortunately, if you're working 12 to 18 hours a day in the studio, every day for 2 or 3 months working on an album, and you're listening that loud all the time, you're damaging your ears. Songs from a Headband says, Michael, I've found that taking portions of a multiple vitamin about 3 times a day greatly reduces tinnitus. Thanks for that tip. I actually I'm really good about taking vitamins. Yeah, can you take them 3 times a day without hurting your liver? Anyway, what the hell was I talking about? I don't even know. I've lost track. Yeah, you definitely get more hearing fatigue at loud levels. There's no question. Mixing, low-level mixing. So yes, in a perfect world, using monitors, like I would always check my mixes on Oratones, which is basically like a 4 or 5 inch mid-range driver thrown in a little cube, and they were a well-known industry standard for checking your mixes on something that wasn't terribly sexy sounding or hi-fi. And when I started using NS10s, I tried so hard to mix at relatively low levels, and it just didn't work out for me. There were days where I would, like put a piece of tape or take a grease pencil and make a little mark on the console and force myself not to turn the monitors up any louder than that. And then I would listen to the mix later and go, I know other people that have successfully mixed at low levels forever, and yay, hats off to them for doing that. But man, oh man, like when you're getting a drum sound, real drums, and you just want to hear it, like not have to go, does that sound good? Not have to strain or wonder about it. So I would crank the monitors up fairly loud when you're doing boom, boom, boom on the high tom, going around the kit. And you could spend anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour. That's how long I would typically spend getting my drums dialed in. And by the time you've done that, your ears are blown out for the day, but you got a great drum sound. Oratones, I mean, in theory, they're not just for the mid-range. It's not like you use them with another monitor, although there were times that I would use my Oratones and my NS10s at the same time. That didn't work out very well. They're supposed to replicate kind of like what a fairly low to mid-range stereo would have sounded like back in the day. Not something like with, what did I have? I can't remember. Before I had 4311s at home, I can't remember, but I had like, a $400 pair of 12-inch three-ways at home. Fishers, I think they were Fisher 12-inch three-ways. And that was a pretty decent, it certainly wasn't a high-end stereo. And I think I had, a 100-watt receiver. So it sounded okay. But a lot of people were still listening on, like a Panasonic home stereo. So that's Oratones were supposed to be something that didn't sound very good. So if your mixes sounded good on Oratones, I don't know people who really fully mixed on them, but they would do playbacks. Maybe the next day after they finished a mix session, they would come in the next morning and listen to Oratones at a relatively low volume because that was supposed to give you an indication of what it might sound like in a car stereo, which was very important back then. By the way, something I don't think I've ever mentioned on the show before is we all know that you should check your mixes in 3 or 4 different places, environments that you are familiar with and that you know. I had a theory one day. This is crazy. We're taking cassettes out to the car and listening to a mix in the car on a cassette, but it's not being broadcast, and there's none of that compression that you get in a broadcast situation. So I actually I think I went to Radio Shack, or maybe had a Radio Shack catalog. Anyway, I bought a thing that was an integrated circuit. And back then, you would buy these things. They were basically made like in an ice cube tray. They would make the circuit. It was probably a discrete circuit, no chip involved. So it had like a resistor and transistors and capacitors that were all wired together. And then they would put it in something like an ice cube tray, like one slot of an ice cube tray, and then pour in epoxy and let it cure. And then the wire leads came out of the epoxy. So I got a hold of a little baby FM transmitter that didn't have much range. It had like a 200-foot range on it. And we would actually broadcast the mix from the control room, and I would go out and listen. At the time, I was driving a Triumph Spitfire. Remember those little two-seater ragtop? I had a Triumph Spitfire with an FM radio with a mono speaker, and that's what I would broadcast to, and go listen to my mixes in mono, broadcast from 150 feet away. It was okay. I can't say that I would recommend it, but it was okay. Yeah, Triumph Spitfire was a very cute car. It had like 87 horsepower, but it was pretty quick. It was. It was a very light car. It had a very low center of gravity and great handling, and a ton of fun to put the top down on that car. Unfortunately, most of the years that I owned it, I had it in Miami or Fort Lauderdale. Not a lot of windy mountain roads there. But at some point, I did take it with me. I trailered it when I moved to New Jersey and worked in New York, and I would drive through the Watchung Mountains in New Jersey on an autumn day with the top down on that car. So much fun. Loved that car. I think I kept that car for like 14 years. Pat Wara tests his mixes on his cell phone, with and without earbuds. Yeah, 50% of people do listen. It's sad. I've mentioned this on the show before. My daughters, when they were in high school, it's like, why do you mix in stereo? I only listen on one earbud. Ooh, Triumph TR6. Yeah, that was the grown-up version of my car. I actually like the body style of the Spitfire more, but the TR6 had more guts to it. Was definitely an upgrade that I couldn't afford. Hey, you can buy Spitfires and TR6s relatively inexpensively these days. If you've never heard of the site, there's a site called something trailer, take a trailer. Oh, I can't remember, but it's a great place to find cars. I had an Austin Healey 3000 Peter Rahill. When I was in grade school, I grew up in a town called Ottawa, Illinois, and there were no foreign cars in that town. It was a small farm town. There were like 2 Volkswagens in my hometown. And one day I remember coming out of school when I was in like, I don't know, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And all these kids were gathered around this little white car. And I walked over to look at it, and I see a hand waving. It was my father sitting behind the steering wheel. I don't know what possessed him to do this, but he bought like a year-old Austin Healey 3000, which was like a couple of steps up from a Triumph and a step down from a Jaguar. But it had an inline 6-cylinder engine in it. The car would do like 120 miles an hour. And today, to find one that was in pretty good shape, I think would be around $50,000. Back then, I think I want to say he paid $3,000 for it in the mid to late 60s. They're just a beautiful classic car. Yeah, ours was eggshell white with wire wheels on it. Yeah, it was just, I love that car. That honestly, that's my fantasy. If I ever become wealthy enough to just piss away 50 grand on a toy, I would do that. I would buy that car again, but I'd probably piss away another 50 grand sending it to the shop all the time to be fixed. 58 MGA, also gorgeous. Yeah, I love old British ragtops. The problem is they spend so much time in the shop, largely because of electrical problems, thanks to Lucas Electrical, which was just horrible. In my Spitfire, if I hit a pothole, all the gauges would move up a quarter of an inch. When I hit the next pothole, they would all go back down. Oh, man. Speaking of Jay Leno's garage, I've got a friend named Ray. He used to own Guitar Center. I haven't seen him in years now, but we became pretty close. He owned Guitar Center. He sold it. He semi-retired, and now he's always collected cars, but he's got a couple of large warehouses about 5 minutes from where I live. At any point, he's got, I don't know, 75 or more like rare cars. He had one car in there, I want to say, let's say it was not an Alfa Romeo, maybe a 1938 Alfa that he bought from the Prince of Brunei. And I want to say that, oh no, he bought it from Calvin Klein, who bought it from the Prince of Brunei, I think. I want to say it's a 38 Alpha GT. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, it was gorgeous. I'd never seen anything like it. And I want to say that he paid $10 million for that car, for one car. Yeah, one car. Anyway, I've been to his garage, I don't know, 6 or 8 times. And I mean, he's got everything from Duesenbergs to Packards to classic Porsches, anything that you could, Ferraris, just anything you could possibly imagine. It's like Jay Leno's garage. Literally like that. He doesn't have as many weird cars as Jay Leno has, but you know, they know each other. They go to the same events. They both show cars, I'm sure, at like the Concours d'Elegance in Pebble Beach every year. Anyway. Ooh, the rain is coming down now. Yeah, the force was not with Lucas Electrical, not even a little bit. I wanted to talk about contemporary. I'm going to do a little short version of it. Not too long before we went on air, I saw a message from Ian Shortle online, a place that we both belong to, and he and I will chat on there every now and then. And we're talking about sounding contemporary. It's a subject I like to talk about a lot because it's kind of like a plague, and I totally get it. And Ian said what I've known for years and is the case for many, many, many of you, and not just Taxi members, but musicians and songwriters all over the world, and that is people tend to write material that sounds like the stuff that they loved when they were in their prime of music listening and loving years, usually in your 20s and 30s, maybe even like from high school up until you're 30 years old. And then once you get married and get a job and buy a house and have all those responsibilities, you tend to listen more in just your car. I don't think a lot of people come home from work and avoid turning on the TV, instead sitting down like in a beautiful easy chair and cranking up the stereo and listening to music and just sitting there listening to music for hours. But when you're in college, you hang out in your dorm room or your apartment, and back then we didn't watch so much TV. There wasn't, certainly didn't have the internet, certainly didn't have these things. And we entertained ourselves by altering our states. However you did that, could be through meditation, I guess, and listening to music, whether it was on speakers or on headphones, and we would listen for hours on end. So we, through osmosis, absorbed those styles of melody, those styles of vocal delivery, those styles of songwriting. And that is what is burnished into our consciousness and into our musical souls. And therefore, when people write music that are now people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, the music they write sounds like what music sounded like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's a hard habit to break. And there is a market for that stuff sometimes, but there's a much, much bigger market for music that sounds contemporary. So, Ian, this is for you and for anybody else that has this issue. Robin Frederick, the last time she was on Taxi TV a few weeks ago, she said, Michael, I just look at the taxi listings every day and listen to the references, because for the most part, the listings are looking for contemporary material. So if you want somebody else, meaning the A&R staff at Taxi, or the clients that we have that give us the references, usually listings have some combination of the two. Usually it's one or two refs from the listing party, and then the staff will add one or two to flesh it out a little more. Robin says that's her favorite go-to spot. She checks out the taxi listings every day, as you should, and she listens to all three of the references and then takes notes. And if she likes an artist that she hears, or even if she doesn't particularly love that artist, she may want to know more about them to get familiar with that genre. She will then go Google them and listen to more of their stuff. So I think that is the simplest and most brilliant way to get a really good cross-section of contemporary music into your musical soul. And if you did that just every day for half an hour, after some period of time, that stuff is going to absorb into your musical soul. And then when you start writing or mixing or producing, all those elements that you have now absorbed from contemporary music by going through that process are probably going to come out the other end through your fingertips, your ears, and there you go. Foo Fighters, you could say they're a contemporary band. They are. But the Foo Fighters, I don't know, how long have they been a band? 15 years or more? Pat Wara is asking, Michael, excuse me, does every taxi listing get emailed to us in the daily emails? Yes. There are no secret listings. There's nothing posted. Like if you go in and look at the listings online, there won't be any listings online that haven't been emailed to you. Pat says, good. That's what I read first. Good job, Pat. He doesn't scour the website. Yeah, if you look at what comes in your email box every day, you don't need to scour the website. There's nothing in there that you won't see in the emails. It's just people don't look at the emails. We only get, it's a very healthy by industry standards open rate. We typically get like between 25 and 33% of all members open the emails. But what about all the people who don't? It's crazy. Even if you did nothing more than open the email every day and just take a minute or two just to read those three listings, how many people have said online somewhere or asked for a refund from Taxi or complained to us, I never see any listings in my genre? And it's like, well, and they tell us what their genre is. I'm sitting there scratching my head going, what the hell do you mean? There are listings in your genre all the time. Apparently, they just don't open the emails. So, they open the emails kind of on a passive basis once or twice, 3 times a month. Well, of course, they're missing 90% of the opportunities and probably missing a lot in their genre. So, it's crazy. Andre, first thing he does is check taxi email before he checks any personal emails. Thank you, Andre, and that's probably why you're so damn good. We can't hear Pat. The reason that we don't set favorites, set when the favorite reminders get. I would love to be able to. Oh, I see what you're saying. I would love to be able to set when the favorite reminders get sent. I need more than 3 days to get to a listing. I think we just made it 7 or 8 days. I think we just changed that like a week or two ago. I could be wrong, but set up a reminder for yourself and see. I too agree that 3 days wasn't enough. We did it to 3 days originally because people don't react when something has a fair amount of lead time. People don't often, they go, oh yeah, I should take care of that, and then they don't. We find that the Monday versions of Taxi TV have better viewership if we send out an email announcing it on Sunday, and then another email goes out like 3 hours before the show goes live. We'll probably get 25 to 35% more viewers by sending out the reminder a few hours before. So that was the theory we went with for the reminders on the listings. And apparently people needed more time for the very same reason you're stating, which is you need more time. When you see a reminder that you want to respond to, having just 3 days isn't enough. So we just recently made it, I believe, 7 or 8 days. Double check me on that. Anyway, we're over time now. Gosh, and I felt like I didn't have anything much to talk about on today's show. So don't forget, I will see you guys on Monday right here, 4 o'clock. If you haven't given us a like today, please do. If you have any ideas for future shows, please drop them in the comments in the archive of today's show when it goes up on YouTube. Also, we are always looking for people who would be good candidates to be passenger profiles, like Andre was this month in the Taxi newsletter. So please go into the comments and say, I would like to be a passenger profile person. Here's a link to my website so we can go check you out, or a link to your taxi profile. What else do I want to tell you? What is Monday's show? Oh, Monday's show for the regular Taxi TV. I am going to have taxi member Bob Metty, who is as good on piano as Andre is on guitar. Bob is a legit jazz pianist and does classical as well, does a lot of like big band stuff from the 40s. And what makes him so interesting is that he travels a lot. When COVID's not around, he's in the air 3, 4, 5 times a week, flying around the country doing like sales technique presentations, I believe. He's not selling something, he's teaching people how to sell better. And he makes presentations to companies and groups of people, whatever. He travels all the time. Yet this guy has had a lot of really good placements, oftentimes with something as simple, and I put that in quotes, as cocktail jazz piano. He's had some enviable placements. He's really smart. He's really a good guy. And last time I had him on Taxi TV, I believe like 3 years ago, maybe 2018, people loved that show. So don't miss the regular Taxi TV, Monday, 4 o'clock, right here. If you're not a subscriber to Taxi TV, please hit that red button and become a subscriber so you don't miss any of the episodes or the Quarantinis. With that, I bid you all a fond farewell. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday, 4 o'clock, right here. Same time, same channel. Bye, you guys.